Welcome to our devotional series, Righteousness from the Heart, a study of the Beatitudes in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So far in our study, we have looked at the first three of those Beatitudes. And there's a common thread that runs through those three Beatitudes. In some way, all three of them speak of emptiness. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You see a lack of pride. You see humility. Blessed are those who mourn. There's remorse and emptiness that results because of the effect of sin. Blessed are the meek. Here's a selfless spirit, a lack of self-interest or a lack of self-promotion. These, of course, are all essential elements in building the proper foundation of righteousness or of being right with God. They're essential if we are to live righteousness from the heart. Now, the next beatitude in our study from Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Unlike the three beatitudes that go before it, this one speaks of being fulfilled, of being satisfied. And according to what it says, the only thing that can bring that fulfillment or that satisfaction is righteousness. Righteousness is the only thing that can fill the deepest longings of our lives and bring satisfaction and fulfillment. Man seeks fulfillment in so many different ways apart from God, ways that always leave them empty, broken. Think about the scourge of drugs and alcohol in our land today. Think about the rampant immorality that has become so prevalent in our world. And not all of the ways that men seek that fulfillment and satisfaction are so recognizably sinful. Some are, in fact, respectable. Think about the amassing of material possessions, or intellectual pursuit, or the amassing of power. And while these are not considered sinful to many people, when they are used to seek that satisfaction that only God can give, just like those things that are recognizably wrong, they fail to fulfill, they fail to satisfy. I want you to listen to the wise man Solomon in Proverbs chapter 23. And I'm going to begin reading at verse 29. We'll read down to the end of the chapter, about 7 verses altogether. Listen to what he has to say, and it fits with our study. Proverbs 23, verse 29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who tarry long over wine. Those who go to try mixed wine. Do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent and it stings like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, like one who lies on the top of a mast. They struck me, you will say, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake? I must have another drink. Now, of course, Solomon here speaking about alcohol and its evil effect. And notice he says, don't just think about it at the beginning, when it's in the cup and sparkling, when it goes down smoothly. Think about the end result of it. Think about what it does to you. It's going to bite like a serpent. It will sting like an adder. It brings all kind of harm and hurt. But that last verse is so intriguing. When shall I awake? I must have another drink. You know, that's what addiction to the things of this world will do to you. In spite of the hurt, in spite of the pain that you know it's going to bring, you go back again seeking that promise, the fulfillment of that promise that it makes, and yet you miss the emptiness and the brokenness. But now here's the point. What Solomon says about alcohol in these verses is true of anything and everything that we use to seek fulfillment and satisfaction away from God. It will not. It will not fulfill. It gives the promise, but it never delivers. It was the French philosopher Pascal who coined the phrase, a God-shaped void, when he spoke about seeking fulfillment and satisfaction. And his point was that God created man in such a way that there is that within us that only he can fulfill. The only way you can fulfill that void, find fulfillment and satisfaction, is with the righteousness that God provides. And so the Beatitudes teach us that we are to be empty of self, empty of sin, and then we fill that void with righteousness. Going back to this particular beatitude, notice the way we go about filling that void. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst. Here, this is an indication of an intense desire. It's not that you're just looking for something. It's not just a goal like a New Year's resolution, but this is a hunger, a thirst. You see it so clearly in the life of Jesus. In the 2nd chapter of John, John records Jesus cleansing the temple at the beginning of his ministry. You know, he did it at the end of the ministry. But John also records a cleansing of the temple at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And when Jesus did that, John 2 verse 17 says, his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has consumed me. Consumed. Look at that word. Here is someone who, it's not just an interest, but you're immersed in something. It's not just an occasional thought that comes to mind, but it's a single-mindedness. Your mind is dominated by this idea. Zeal for God in his house consumed Jesus. That's what his life was about. Just as righteousness ought to consume the child of God today. Hebrews 11 and verse 6 is a verse I know you're probably familiar with. The Hebrew writer says, without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Look at a couple of words in that verse. First of all, the word must. Must believe that he exists. This leaves no alternative. This is non-negotiable. And then the word seek at the end of the verse. The King James says, diligently seek him. And the idea of that word is to seek out and to search. And in fact, it carries the idea of begging, craving. And that fits exactly with the idea of hungering and thirsting. Here's an intense desire and an intense longing for God. It's illustrated also very well for us in the parable of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. And you're familiar with the parable. The son came to the father. He wanted his part of the inheritance. He takes that. He goes into a far country, and there very recklessly he spends all of it. And then a famine arises, and he's hungry. And so he goes to a man that has pigs, and he goes into the field to feed those pigs. And it's there that he comes to himself and realizes, I'm not where I need to be, and I'm not doing what I need to be doing. And he decides he's going to go home and acknowledge his fault unto his father. But you know, like the prodigal, we can be too easily fooled into thinking that whatever sin we're engaged in or whatever earthly pursuit has grabbed a hold of us, that this is the life. This is what life is all about. But like the prodigal, we need to learn that that life does not satisfy. That life doesn't provide anything. And when he was hungry, he went into the field thinking, I could eat what the pigs are eating. But when he was starving, when he was truly hungry, his thoughts turned to his father and the bounty that was at home. We too may try to fill our desires with earthly things. But we need to understand those earthly things are like what the pigs are eating. And that doesn't satisfy. That doesn't bring fulfillment. We need the bread that is in our Father's house. We need that which only God himself can supply. Jesus said in John chapter 6 and verse 48, I am the bread of life. That's what we need. We need what Jesus offers. And this beatitude describes that as righteousness. Now, in this series of studies, we've already looked at that word righteousness. And we've given it a definition that righteousness is doing the right thing with the right attitude of heart. It's not just the right thing. 1 John 3 verse 7 says, he who practices righteousness is righteous. But it goes deeper than just the action. In Matthew 15 and verse 7 beginning, Jesus said to the Jewish leaders of his day, you hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me. The word vain means empty. The worship didn't mean anything. Teaching is doctrine, the commandments of men. And so we do the right thing, but it also involves doing it for the right reason. That's righteousness. And that's what we are to hunger and thirst for, to know and to understand what it is that God desires from us, to know his will, and then to develop that attitude of heart that desires to do that above anything else. That is hungering and thirsting for righteousness. And Jesus said, those who do so will be satisfied. That satisfaction is reflected in the words of the psalmist. In Psalm 40 and verse 8, he said, I delight to do your will, O God. Your law is in my heart. You can see it in the words of Jesus when he was at Jacob's well. John chapter 4, he had sent the apostles into the city to buy food. He stayed at the well. Of course, that's when he spoke with the woman at the well. And when the apostles returned, they offered him food. He said, I have food you know not of. And they didn't understand. And he explained, John 4 verse 34, my food is to do the will of him that sent me and to accomplish his work. Doing the will of the Father. That was food to Jesus. It also weaves its way through the words of the Apostle John. 1 John 2 verse 15 says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever. And when we follow what this beatitude teaches, Christianity becomes a way of life that has meaning, a way of life that has purpose. And that purpose, wrapped up in God's righteousness, is what brings satisfaction. It brings it here and now, and in the end, in eternal life with God. Thank you so much for joining me in this study. It's my prayer that it has been beneficial to you, and I hope you'll join me again as we continue our study of the Beatitudes, as we continue to learn what is involved in righteousness from the heart. And until next time, may God bless.